Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov gang. Tonight, our very special guest, Daniel Greenfield, a Shillman Journalism Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the editor of the blog The Point, which can be found at frontpagemag.com. Daniel, welcome back to the Glazov gang.
Good to be back.
Thank you very much. I want to talk about a few things with you tonight, about Israel, Iran, Obama. But tonight, Daniel, I want to start with, in my opinion, what was one of your greatest blogs, and they're all great, but just an amazing, profound blog you wrote several years ago that I think is very relevant for today more than ever. Allahu Akbar. Tell us what Allahu Akbar means and what the West tries to tell, what the Western media tries to tell people it means.
Well, what the Western media does is say that it's about celebration. When people are happy, when you're happy, you shout Allahu Akbar. When you're trying to take down a plane, you also shout Allahu Akbar, but that just happens to be a coincidence. The official translation is God is great. The real translation is Allah is greater than your God. Allah is supreme. He's supreme to your God. He's supreme to all other gods. He's supreme to you. It's a supremacist statement. It's an Islamic supremacist statement because Islam is a religion of supremacism. It derives its religious motivation not from faith, but from defeating enemies and from subjugating them. By subjugating them, Islam demonstrates its supremacy and therefore the supremacy of Allah. When Muslims win a battle, then Allah is proven to be supreme. If Muslims don't win a battle, then Allah is out of luck because there's no actual religious element here. There's no faith element.
And readers should read that article, Allahu Akbar. It's in the May 2011 edition of Daniel's blog, Sultan Kanish. Let me read a part of it. Allahu Akbar doesn't mean Allah is great. Isn't Allah and the Virgins of Paradise a great band? It's more like Allah is greater or greatest or superior. And if you're on the right side of the cockpit door, the one doing the shouting, Allahu Akbar, means that Allah is superior to your country and to you, and one of his followers is about to do his best to show you why. So, if you know, when a Muslim is screaming Allahu Akbar, it's usually not because he really loved a movie or they're going to a great soccer game. And as you say here, Daniel, if you're on the wrong side of the cockpit and a jihadist is screaming that, there might be something very bad that may happen to you.
If you go back to the origin of the term, it's when Muhammad and his fun-loving bandits attacked a Jewish town, and they shouted Allahu Akbar specifically because these people were Jewish, they worshiped God, and these were Muslims, they worshiped Allah, so they were shouting Allah is superior to you. That was the origin of the phrase. That's where it comes from.
But the Western media, whenever it writes about Allahu Akbar, is always translating it for us as if it means God is great. And it by no means means that the jihadists mean that Allah is great at that time. What they're basically saying, I know I'm being a little bit repetitive here, but I want to strike the point home, is that Allah is the greatest and we are superior to you. Why does the media constantly lie to us and lie to itself?
Because the media has to cover up the reality, because if we actually deal with the truth of Islamic terrorism, the red line leads right back to the liberal enablers to the left who promoted immigration policies, who promoted policies that were destructive of national security, who promoted appeasement. If you nail Muslims, if you nail Islam, if you nail jihad for what it really is, then you also have to deal with their leftist enablers, and the leftist enablers don't want that. They've become complicit in this.
And so, Daniel, in this term, Allahu Akbar, and how Muslims use it, it shows that Islam is completely different as a quote-unquote religion than Judaism and Christianity, because Christians and Jews do not believe on many realms that we are superior and therefore need to subjugate the unbeliever.
When we talk about religion, we mean faith. We don't necessarily mean that if we win a battle, then that means that our God is right and your God is wrong. And that's really the level in which Muslims connect to an issue. That's why they shout Allahu Akbar. So, for example, martyrdom among Jews and Christians meant people who suffered for their faith, people who were killed but who through their faith proved superior. They accepted suffering, they endured suffering, but they kept their faith. In Islam, it's just the opposite. They're martyrs or the killers. The guys who blow up themselves up, hoping for 72 virgins, are the martyrs. It's a completely opposite notion because it's a completely different religious understanding. Martyrdom in Islam isn't dying for your faith, it's killing for your faith.
Daniel, you write in that article that the message of Allahu Akbar is the message of the Quran 61:9, verse 61:9. He, quote, "He it is who has sent his messenger with guidance in the religion of truth to make it victorious over all religions, even though the infidels may resist." And so you write, his messenger is Muhammad, the religion is Islam, and the infidels who resist get beheaded or have planes rammed into their buildings. So in conclusion, therefore, on Allahu Akbar, Daniel?
There's nothing religious about it because there's really nothing religious about Islam. Islam isn't a faith, it's about power. And what we're dealing with is naked power. It's supremacism, it's imperialism, it's conquest, it's colonialism. That's what we're experiencing. We're not experiencing a religious war in the sense that most people think of religion. We're just experiencing a war in which a religion disguised as a power philosophy advances its interest at our expense.
And I mean, I really wanted to narrow in on this because today when we're seeing ISIS and Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda and all these terrorist attacks, we constantly hear them screaming, Allahu Akbar. We hear the jihadists screaming this. We heard Nidal Hassan screaming this at Fort Hood, etc., etc. And the media is not telling the West what it really means and why jihadists are screaming it and the roots in Islamic theology, including Quran 61:9. Daniel, what a profound thing, what a profound paragraph you wrote in that article as well. Let's transfer over a little bit to that paragraph into the theme of suicide and martyrdom for jihadists. You write, Islam is that utter submission, a frustrated act of individual suicide that in the case of a suicide bomber involves actual death, but by dying, he proves himself immortal in the collective. When Muslims boast that they don't fear death, and even demonstrate it by committing suicide, what they are really doing is embracing a collective existence. By rejecting individualism, they shout their omnipotence. The individual killing himself is to become immortal is one of the perverse paradoxes of tyranny, and it lies at the heart of Islam. Wow, I read that over several times the last few evenings. When a jihadist kills himself, Daniel, he becomes immortal in the collective. It is a good thing in their view. Explain this central component of jihad.
You saw the same thing in Nazi Germany and in the Soviet Union. When you see the mass crowds chanting, for example, for Hitler, this is the end of the individual. It's the denial of the individual. It's individuals gloriously submitting to the collective and saying that we individually don't matter. And you see jihadists shouting, they love death, meaning us. Meaning they love death, and we love life, meaning us, that we want to live and they want to die. This is their idea of triumph. Instead of dealing with their human limitations, instead of trying to become better people, what they do instead is destroy themselves. They accept that they are fundamentally flawed, and you really see what jihadists, when you look at their backgrounds, a lot of these people are very bad people. You've got drug dealers and so on. For example, the beheaders of Weirigby in London were drug dealers. They're bad people, but instead of trying to become good people, what they do is they kill themselves, they subsume themselves within Islam, and they accept the idea that they are now going to be part of this vast collective and that they have to die to make that happen.
They join a collective in their view of the afterlife, whatever it is.
Well, they're offered these 72 virgins. That was obviously a really great selling point for Muhammad because he could urge his men to attack and raid en route, and if they succeeded, they would get treasure and women and so on. If they failed, they would still get those same things supposedly in paradise. But the jihadist is actually told to embrace death. They romanticize death. If you look at jihadist poetry, jihadist music such as it is, They romanticize death. They romanticize the idea of dying and being eliminated because they really hate and despise the idea of the individual. And this is really where they come across to us because we're an individualistic culture. We believe in the individual. We don't believe in the collective.
They
At least
hate,
we used to not believe in it.
they hate individualism so much, they hate the individual so much that they shed themselves of their own individuality by killing themselves and become immortal in the collective.
They reject the idea that an individual can be a good person because that's what Islam really teaches. And rejecting that idea, you have to kill the individual. The only way to be a good person is basically to die while killing others. It's a
Okay,
cult of death.
right. And how telling it is that this is the central component of jihad. And I am yet to see Anderson Cooper and MSNBC, CNN, and New York Times, Washington Post interview a person like you about it that understands this very profound and frightening aspect of Islam and what really is motivating jihad. In
Well,
that,
it really hits a little too close to home because if you look at the Soviet Union, if you look at how the left sympathized with that, if you look at how Stalin got things done by killing millions of people and all of it was justified for the collective good, it hits way too close to the left.
absolutely, Daniel. You write about the normalizers, the elements in our culture, the media in our culture that are trying to normalize Islam. And you write that the normalizers insist that Islam is no different than Judaism or Christianity, but what they can't explain is the global body count.
They can't explain that because they never address what Islam really is and what Islam really does. If you look at, for example, all the hysterical reactions to ISIS, ISIS is un-Islamic, ISIS is a nihilistic death cult, ISIS completely has nothing to do with Islam. I think as John Brennan recently said, it's an ideology of violence, whatever that means. They do recognize what's going on, but they completely refuse to deal with the origins of it. They refuse to deal with something the left loves to deal with, which is root causes. So if they have to, they will localize it in American foreign policy, in Israeli foreign policy, in 1948, in 1992, but they will completely refuse to deal with the 7th century, with Muhammad, with Islam and the Quran.
Daniel, at the moment, the left is in power in government, in media, in academia, in the higher literary culture, in the culture overall. The culture is imposing Islamic blasphemy laws in the sense that something like this can simply not be said in our media anymore, that there's anything actually at the root of jihad that's actually in Islam itself. At this state, if we continue down this path, Western civilization cannot defend itself.
Well, what happens with totalitarian systems is that you have a reality gap, which is the difference between what's actually going on and between what the regime says is going on. When the reality gap is not so big, then people can sort of accept the propaganda. When the reality gap gets really big, for example, in the Soviet Union, when they said there's a 92% successful harvest, but there was no bread in the stores, then the reality gap is so big that people can no longer accept the propaganda. With Islamic terrorism, for that matter with the economy, we're increasingly approaching a point where the reality gap is so big that the public will simply reject what they're being told.
But it may be too late when the public stands up.
It may be, it may not be. That's part of our role. That's part of what we do here. We tell the truth. We try to wake people up, and we prepare the ground for the eventual awakening.
No, absolutely. It's just what's frightening me is the way that the Muslim Brotherhood under Obama's watch, and because of Obama, has infiltrated the government, penetrated, so many institutions and government institutions in our society. Daniel Greenfield, let's switch over to some of the big events and frightening events happening in the world today. Is Obama making it easy for Iran to get the nuclear bomb? I think that's a little bit of a stupid question, but answer it. And if the answer is yes, why?
Well, let me just give you an analogy. Right now, France thinks that Obama is being way too soft on Iran. When France thinks that we're being too soft on Iran, we're really being way, way too soft on Iran. Really, there's not much of a point of agreement. Nobody in the Middle East thinks that we're doing the right thing with Iran. Even the Europeans question what we're doing with Iran. Obama's basically out there on his own with just the media covering his back.
Why is Obama doing the wrong thing with Iran?
Well, for one thing, he's had a lot of people in his administration who have ties to the Iran lobby. Joe Biden, Chuck Hagel, John Kerry all had ties to the Iran lobby. Especially with the rise of ISIS, they've been persuaded by the idea that the United States needs to ally with Iran. That's a completely corrupt and deceptive idea. But beyond that, the whole idea is that the whole idea that animates the left is that American foreign policy is wrong. If we have enemies, it's because we created these enemies through our foreign policy. So if Iran hates us, if its supreme leader shouts death to America, it means that we did something to deserve that. And we have to appease our way out of this. We can't confront our way out of this. We can't pressure our way out of this. We have to find out what their grievances are and apologize for whatever we did to offend them. So if they want a nuclear bomb, then it's their right to have a nuclear bomb.
Iran has killed Americans. It is involved in killing Americans. It is a terrorist regime that runs Iran. Why would Obama take those terrorists and that terrorist regime off the terror list?
Well, Obama has been friends with a whole lot of terrorists, going right back to Bill Ayers. Terrorist is a problem if you're, say, a person, a New Yorker in the World Trade Center on September 11th. On the other hand, if you're a leftist radical, then you don't necessarily believe that terrorists are bad people. You believe that they're oppressed people, that they're aggrieved people, that they've been hurt so badly that they're resorting to extreme tactics. You don't think that terrorists are evil, and Obama does not think that terrorists are evil. You can see that in his administration. You can see it in his policy.
But he thinks, I think that America is evil.
America is evil because America causes terrorism. If there's terrorism, it's because we did it. It's blowback.
Daniel, if and when, God forbid, the mullahs get the nuclear bomb, what happens then, in your view? Do you think they'll try to use it right away? Will it be a force that they will use for blackmail? What will happen?
Well, first of all, it's important to remember that Obama's handling of Iran has sent a message to the rest of the Middle East that we're not going to stop Iran. So they're pursuing their own nuclear programs. Saudi Arabia is pursuing its own nuclear program. Egypt is pursuing its own nuclear program. A whole bunch of Sunni Arab states are going to pursue their own nuclear program, which means that when Iran does get the bomb, it's not going to be owned. There are going to be 4 or 5 other countries in the Middle East that will also have nuclear bombs. Even if all those countries decide to be saints and they don't use the nuclear, but they don't just start shooting at each other or at us or at Israel, those weapons are going to fall into the hands of terrorists sooner or later. We've seen with Iraq and Syria. Syria, by the way, had its own nuclear program going before Israel bombed it fairly recently. Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, obviously had its own nuclear program. And we've seen how fragile those countries are, how easily ISIS was able to tear through to Syria and through Iraq. So even if those countries do get the bomb and they don't use it, those weapons are going to fall into the hands of terrorists sooner or later. So we're looking at a scenario where terrorists will have nuclear weapons.
Like ISIS and Boko Haram.
Yeah, they will have nuclear weapons. And we've seen what they do with machetes. We've seen what they do with swords. We can imagine what they're going to be ready to do with nuclear weapons.
Frightening times. Daniel Greenfield, is Obama waging a war on Israel?
Obama has been hostile to Israel from the very beginning. He's been increasingly escalating further and further. And now it's actually, we're treating Israel like a hostile state, and we're treating Iran like a friend and a pal. So there's a fundamental problem here. Obama had 2 outcomes for the Israeli election. One was that a left-wing party was going to take over, and he would be able to work with them. The second outcome was that Netanyahu was going to stay in power, and Obama responded to that by essentially opening fire.
What do you think about his temper tantrum after Netanyahu's victory?
It's getting uglier and uglier. Now we've got accusations of dual loyalty. He's trying to push the idea that the Congress itself is guilty of treason. We're getting into this really creepy banana republic territory. The White House is pretending that it's really upset because Netanyahu questioned the feasibility of the 2-state solution. Meanwhile, when the head of Iran says death to America, that's just a domestic matter that doesn't deserve to get any particular attention.
Why do you think Obama, wait a minute, let me backtrack. I think we would agree that Obama very much dislikes Netanyahu, even on a personal level.
Yeah, that was very obvious from the start. And it's not just Netanyahu. For example, he dislikes Harper. Over in Canada, Prime Minister Harper. The U.S. ambassador hasn't actually met with Harper, I think, in years at this point. He dislikes the John Abbott, who heads up in Australia, because he's also conservative. So he gets along badly with conservative leaders. He also gets along badly with traditional American allies. I mean, he's getting along badly with France, and that has a socialist government.
White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough recently referred to the occupation that has lasted for almost 50 years, that it must end. The U.S. under Obama is now referring to the Israeli occupation. I mean, this is quite significant because this is a blatant lie.
It is, and it's a sign of how hostile this administration is getting, and the mask is coming off, and they're showing this kind of typical angry left-wing campus language, which isn't usually used in diplomatic circles. But these guys are basically fresh off the campus in some ways. They hate Israel, and they really don't see any reason to hide it anymore.
Daniel, Obama has berated Israel for building settlements in Jerusalem, one of the oldest cities in the world. Let me ask this, it's interesting even the assumptions there and what our media and the world doesn't say when this happens. Why can't Jews build settlements? I mean, Palestinians and Arabs can live in Israel. Nobody ever really says anything about this, or I mean especially in our higher literary culture and in the media, that it's significant that Jews are not allowed to build settlements, let's say in Gaza or in the West Bank. Let's talk about that. Why can Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims live in Israel, but somehow Jews not being allowed to live, let's say, in the West Bank is an issue?
You're right, it's absolutely racist, and it's Obama's own version of an apartheid state. He's saying that in Jerusalem, it's okay if an Arab family, if a Muslim family lives in an apartment. It's not okay if a Jewish family lives in an apartment. It's blatant discrimination. Now, if you have a Muslim with Israeli citizenship who moves into an apartment, that's fine. The State Department is not going to protest that. But if you have a Jewish person who is an Israeli citizen moving in, that's going to result in a protest, and that's actually blatant racial discrimination.
You write in one of your excellent blogs recently that the Palestinian Authority shouldn't be paid attention to when it calls for destroying Israel, but it should be relied on when it signs on the dotted line, no matter how many agreements it broke in the past. It's very interesting that when Netanyahu says, something, or is alleged to have said something, Obama's all over it. But yet, as you say here, whatever when the Palestinian Authority or when Iran screams death to America, death to Israel, for some reason we're not supposed to take it seriously.
Every time Arafat would say one thing, the experts and the diplomats would rush to say that this is just for domestic consumption. We shouldn't take it seriously. Now, when Iran does it, it's just also for domestic consumption. He's pandering to hardliners. There's no reason to pay attention to it. When Netanyahu says something during an election, obviously it's a major crisis, and there's no reason for us to believe that he meant anything but that. So there's a double standard here, and again, it's a double standard that also falls the same way in the United States. When Obama says something that's off, oh, we know he didn't mean it. You can keep your doctor if you like your doctor. Forget about it. We know he didn't mean it. But when a Republican says something that they don't like, then obviously it's completely fixed. And this is very much Alinsky. It's make them live by their rules, but don't live by any rules yourself.
Daniel, what is at the heart of Obama's bullying of Israel and of Netanyahu? What's at the heart of it?
On one level, obviously, he rejects the idea of Israel. On the other level, he personally hates Netanyahu, and he views Netanyahu as collaborating with Republicans. He views him as a kind of honorary Republican because he's become so close to Republicans. So he views Netanyahu as a foreign enemy, but he also views him as a domestic enemy, which is why everything got taken up to 11 in the last year or so when Netanyahu became closer to Republicans.
Daniel Greenfield, how much fault can we lay at Obama's doorstep for ISIS and its terrorism at the moment?
We can lay all of it, basically, because Obama was repeatedly warned as to what would happen if the United States withdrew. He was repeatedly warned what was happening once the United States withdrew, and he insisted on pretending that ISIS was a JV team when it was taking over entire cities. So it's not like this is something that nobody could have seen coming. There was a rash of Al-Qaeda suicide bombings right after he withdrew. The media chose not to report it. Obama chose to pretend that Al-Qaeda was on the run and that this wasn't going on. So it's a question of bad faith and a good faith. If you made a good faith effort to nail things down, which Obama pretended that he had, but that he actually hadn't, then there would be some sort of a pass for this. You might say, okay, well, he did his best. But Obama didn't do his best. He lied about it. He lied about it repeatedly. He ignored the problem when it was right in his face. He only chose to do something about it when there was genocide actually happening on television.
Do you think that Obama would like to or wants to defeat ISIS?
He's not talking about defeating ISIS. He's talking about degrading it, which really means beating it up enough so that the moderate parts of ISIS, the ones that only chop half a head off, will come to the negotiating table. This is exactly what he did with the Taliban. This is exactly what he's been doing with Al-Qaeda.
Why?
Because he doesn't really believe that terrorists could be defeated or that they should be defeated. It's the fundamental idea of the left that you can't actually beat terrorists. You have to really negotiate with them. So if they don't want to negotiate, you might need to bomb them occasionally until they negotiate. All this is a vehicle for negotiations.
So Daniel, what might happen if Obama continues in this impotence and if America continues down this line in terms of ISIS?
Well, we've had to pull out of Yemen, which is really endangering our drone program and our ability to fight Al-Qaeda there. You have civil wars effectively raging across the Middle East. You have complete instability spinning out of control and terrorist groups getting stronger and bigger and turning into entire countries. We could very well see ISIS at some point become an actual functioning country, and we could see other countries join it in Africa, in the Middle East, and in Asia.
Daniel, let's turn for a minute to you. I'd like to ask you a little bit. How did Daniel Greenfield not become a leftist? Can you tell us a little bit about your own intellectual journey and how you arrived at your disposition and your views?
I would say that the important factors were religion and culture. There are a lot of people who are just adrift there, who listen to what the media tell them, who have no fundamental root or basis. I had my culture, I had my Jewish culture, I had my Jewish heritage, and I had my Orthodox Jewish religion. And those made it really hard to become part of the left. But I didn't really become politically active in the sense until the Clinton administration. There were a number of, you might say, triggering incidents. One of them was the raid and deportation of Elian Gonzalez, which was a very shocking scene for me, especially since I had ancestors who had come from the Soviet Union, and I could very well imagine what Elian Gonzalez's mother would have felt if she had been alive, to know what had become of her sacrifice. There were other moments in the Clinton administration, the illegal war in Kosovo, that really made me think that I should become active, the entire peace process in Israel. So it's not that I made a journey to leave the left. I wasn't part of the left, but there was an extent to which I wasn't politically involved, and I became politically involved because of 4 or 5 of those incidents, particularly during the Clinton administration.
Could you illuminate for us a little bit how your religious and cultural Judaism is incompatible with leftist philosophy?
Well, first of all, the left is its own religion. If you're really a religious person, you can't really be a leftist, because to be a leftist, you have to become a member of this cult of personality. You have to believe what it believes, and you have to put your religion second. So the people who say that they're part of the religious left, they're part of the left. Their religion is the left. They're not Christians or Jews, really, because they have to put those ideas second, and they have to run those ideas by the left. So when you deal with liberal Jews, for example, these are people who believe in whatever. They don't believe in the Bible. They don't believe in the Word of God. They believe in what they call prophetic revelation or whatnot, or they believe in tikkun olam, which is basically social justice with a Hebrew accent, but they don't actually have a religion. So when you do have a religion, and Orthodox Judaism is a religion, then you can't be a part of the left. Culturally, anybody with any sense of historical memory, any Jews with any sense of historical memory, know what the left did to Jews. For example, quite a few of my ancestors were killed by the Soviet Union. So certainly the idea of aligning with the left, especially a left that had pandered to the Soviet Union, was just completely impossible. And the left's ideas, its ideas about the value of life, its ideas about tyranny, its ideas about the place of the individual within the collective. None of those were compatible with either Jewish culture or Jewish religion.
Daniel, what happened to some of your Jewish ancestors in the Soviet Union? Are you referring to Stalin?
Even before Stalin, if you've heard of the Yevsektia, the Jewish section, quite a few, my grandfather lost quite a few members of his family to them. Some of them were simply taken out and shot in the snow. I've lost quite a few family members on my father's side to the Nazis and quite a few members on my mother's side to the communists. And there really isn't that much difference between them. Liberal Jews will like to believe that the Nazis were bad, but the communists were sort of well-intentioned. They were both really the same thing. The communists and the Nazis were two faces of the same coin. And if you can't work together with neo-Nazis, how can you work together with leftists who excuse those crimes?
Daniel Greenfield, the psychology of leftist Jews.
Well, they're leftists first, and they're Jews basically not at all. Some people use the term Jews in name only, which is accurate enough. When you look at the Communist Party, when you look at the organizations of the left, what they do very well is infiltrate. They take over, they hollow out. They will take an organization, for example, they would take a writer's society. They will take some sort of hobbyist society. They will take it over, hollow it out, and turn it into a voice for them. That's what they did with a lot of liberal Jewish religious entities, for example, Reform Judaism. They simply hollowed them out and turned them into what some people call the Democratic Party with a synagogue, except it's more accurately the far left with a synagogue.
Daniel, when you refer to the Soviet Union, you know, many people believe that communism fell, and I guess on certain realms it fell. But let's be honest. The SOB that's in power there today and the people around him, this is the same nomenclatura, this is the KGB, this is the mafia. These are just the same thugs in power today. There are some maybe differences and whatnot. Just some of your thoughts on the KGB and Putin still being in power in Russia today.
I would say that communism fell in the Soviet Union long before the Soviet Union fell, in the same sense that it fell in China, which is that you replaced the fanatics, the ideologues, the people who were really believed in the world revolution. A lot of those people were taken out and shot. They were sent to gulags. They were ostracized abroad. And what replaced it was this kind of a mafia that you might call, that actually ran things for their own benefit, that really did not care all that much about the ideology of communism, but just used it as a convenient tool. Putin is just more of the same. I mean, it's not all that different from the way things were, except that Putin doesn't really bother with a lot of the trappings of communism.
Who is more evil, Obama or Putin?
Well, they're both evil. They're different types of evil. They're the kinds of evil that are shaped to the particular expressions of the left. And Putin is pursuing a kind of Russian nationalism without really caring about anybody else, including about his own people, but he's also pursuing a Eurasianism, which is a kind of imperialism that really reduces the importance of the Russian people and their place in the larger scheme of things. Obama is pursuing something similar, but he's more open about tearing down America, while Putin actually makes a show of wanting to preserve Russia.
If there is a collision between Putin and Obama, who is more afraid of whom?
Well, there already has been a collision, and Putin is keeping Crimea, so we've already settled that question. Putin is fairly worried about the United States because the Russian military is in bad shape. But the United States the United States under Obama is not about to call his bluff or to do anything that would actually worry him, and he knows it.
Is one of them afraid of the other?
Putin isn't afraid of Obama. Putin is afraid of the United States military, but he knows that he doesn't have much to be afraid of under Obama. Obama isn't so much afraid of Putin because, again, Obama thinks that if somebody is against the United States, they probably have some sort of cause. Obama is more afraid of Republicans than he is of Putin.
You think that Obama is afraid of Republicans?
Well, Republicans can remove him from power. Putin can't remove him from power. And for him, it's about personal power.
Daniel Greenfield, under 60 seconds left. What is primarily on your mind these days?
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see whether the Middle East will entirely transform the kind of countries that have been set up under British colonialism, under French colonialism. They had the vestige, they looked like European systems of government, and people accepted that. Now they're being replaced by systems like ISIS, by beheadings, by open jihad, and it's going to become impossible to deny the reality of what Islam is under such systems.
Daniel Greenfield, always an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for all the knowledge and wisdom that you give us and for your brave fight for freedom and for liberty against our totalitarian enemies.
Likewise, and it's always great to be part of your insightful interviews.
Thank you, Daniel. We hope to see you again soon. And thank you for joining the Glazov gang. We'll see you next week. Good night.